how are we going to see the next step of this tension or reduction of tension on the border between your two countries? Let's go to Mr. Hali first from Islamabad.
Go ahead. Actually, it is interesting to see that the border tension between India and Pakistan comes at a time when you see Pakistan is embroiled in a political struggle of its own. But one would have expected that India would have been a little more understanding about the internal situation in Pakistan. However, you see, the situation has arisen that Pakistan is also trying to construct a mega project with the help of its strategic and long-term all-weather friend China, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which happens to be a part of the One Belt One Road vision of President Xi Jinping of China.
Mr. Shalia, what is your view? Is that a possibility for the reduction of tensions right now?
Well, I'm not very hopeful at the moment because the violence at the border is quite intense. There's shelling by both sides, and quite a few lives have been lost over the last few weeks. And simultaneously, there is a war of words going on at the diplomatic level. The Pakistani military and the Pakistani government has praised secessionist and terrorist actors fighting Indian forces as freedom fighters and as heroes and liberation warriors and so on. And Indian position is that these are mostly jihadist actors and driven by Islamic extremism and fundamentalism, and that there is no way we can compromise on our territorial integrity and sovereignty in Kashmir, which is being challenged by these jihadis who are supported by Pakistan. So I think until and unless there is a kind of a revision in the Pakistani position on this matter about ratcheting up pressure on India about so-called self-determination or freedom movement in Kashmir, I don't think there's only any way we are going to step back from this.
Mr. Hali, you want to respond to that accusation?
Yeah, you see, what is happening in Indian-held Kashmir, as we like to call it, is that in 1947 and 1948, India and Pakistan went to war. The then Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, went to the United Nations, and the United Nations passed resolutions according to which there is supposed to be a plebiscite, and the people of Kashmir on both sides are supposed to decide their fate, whether they want to accede to India and Pakistan. But for the last nearly 70 years now, India has not permitted this plebiscite to take place, because if the United Nations resolutions are enforced, then I think the problem can be resolved once for all, and we will not have this bone of contention. But as far as the allegation of Pakistanis supporting the jihadis is concerned, I don't agree to that, because Pakistan is itself suffering at the hands of jihadis. More than 70,000 Pakistanis have been killed. As far as the Kashmiris are concerned, Pakistan does provide moral and diplomatic support, but nothing beyond that.
Okay. Mr. Ye,
Yes.
you heard the arguments coming from both sides, your Indian and Pakistani colleagues. What do you make of the current crisis? Is there a possibility that we can put to an end?
Actually, it's not only in this studio I hear that these differences between India and Pakistan. As for my personal experience, I witnessed a lot of the similar argument for the last years. But we should recognize that this gunshot, or not only the gunshot, it's a crossfire happened recently. It's not an individual case. Actually, the Kashmir suffered from the unrest is already lasted for almost 1 year since the death of the Wani. Actually, this is just a 1 year anniversary of his death. So I think we should put in this as a background. It will last, and there is no solution. But we also should notice that both sides, India and Pakistan, is not prepared for the total war or for the comprehensive engagement, military engagement. They are still control the scale of the conflict. So I'm saying that we are not hoping that the conflict will be settled down very soon, but we are not. The situation won't be worsened to the very large scale bloody conflict. I think we just between this.
Mr. Talia, do you agree with that? What kind of message do you think this quite small-scale, controlled, and yet certainly worrisome crossfire just happened between India and Pakistan mean to both sides?
I agree with our Chinese friend that it will not intensify into a full-fledged war or large-scale confrontation. But if you look at it in a longer-term perspective, it has been a kind of medium intensity war, one way, whether you call it or not, because since the series of attacks on Indian military camps over the last couple of years, it is seen as an uptick in the tensions, and I don't think we are going to scale them back simply because there is a limit to the endurance of the Indian tolerance that's been tested. So I think whatever strategic restraint was there in the past, I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants to send a message that we cannot keep on absorbing blow after blow without responding. But having said that, India has made some very bold initiatives for peace with Pakistan in the past. Just 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, in December 2015, Prime Minister Modi took a big personal political gamble by visiting Lahore and meeting his counterpart, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. And it looked like a hopeful chapter was about to emerge, but then it all went back to these attacks by jihadis. So I think, even China, I should be concerned about it, because although our friend mentioned the China-Pakistan economic corridor, it passes through terrain which is infested with these hardline radical Islamists. And I think unless those are rooted out, we are not going to overcome the insecurity spiral that's happening in the entire region.
All right, great point there, Dr. Shalia. I want to bring that point to our Pakistani colleagues as well. What about that? 2 years ago, there seemed to be a window of opportunity, but 2 years passed, nothing happened. Once again, fall into the same trap.
Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's surprise visit to Pakistan, and especially visiting Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's own residence close to Lahore, was a very welcome step. But just after that, there was this incident of an attack on the Indian airbase of Pathankot, which rattled both sides. Although Pakistan bent backwards in trying to present its own people for finding the real culprits who were behind it, but it appears that there are non-state actors who would not like to see India and Pakistan have peace, because it suits them to have both the countries in turmoil, and that is why they create situations. But the view on the Indian side, or rather the allegations on the Indian side, have been that these attacks were perpetrated perhaps by the state of Pakistan, which is not true, because the state of Pakistan is itself upset and it was rattled by it, and it would like to find and catch those culprits.
All right. Okay, everything seems to be apparently clear. The history, the solutions, quote unquote, and the recent incidents. Now, here's the thing. With this crossfire, with the economic corridor, there seems to be concerns whether things can be done safely.
Yeah. I think everybody has their own concerns, but the behavior should have the limitation that do not cross the line. That means you can express your concern, but doesn't mean you can take the violent action to express your concern, to sabotage another country's interest. It won't cost it won't be very helpful. It only cause the situation get worse.
Will this influence China's determination to do this economic corridor?
I think China will stay on this current stance that will continue the CPEC's construction, because China always emphasizes this CPEC project doesn't reflect Chinese stance over the sovereignty issue on the sovereignty issue over the Kashmir areas. But China won't accept the Indian's accusation that we built the CPEC to contain India. We built CPEC to enhance the bilateral engagement, economic cooperation between China and Pakistan.
I want to come back to Dr. Shalia. Over the past few days, a week, we see incidents between India and Pakistan. We also saw the incident between India and China. In retrospect, there has been so much changes in our part of the world, and possibly the rules of the world for the future. The concepts, the logics. But Dr. Shalia, at this point, what do you think are some of the most important qualities of countries in facing up to these changes? And how important is it that India and China, two emerging economies, be able to keep this balance well?
Well, I think we continue to view the One Belt, One Road as problematic because it not only challenges the disputed terrain and sovereignty claims in Kashmir with Pakistan, but also has a maritime dimension. And if you look at the larger picture, India, Japan, and the United States are conducting Malabar trilateral naval exercises right now, and the focus is on submarine hunting. And there is a perception that the Chinese People's Liberation Army is encroaching on India's sphere of influence, and that's been a long time concern, especially in our neighborhood. So with Bhutan, this tension you're mentioning, which is happening across the Bhutan-China-India border, there is again a concern about potential Chinese hegemony over Bhutan that may challenge India's interests there. So this is, I think, there are some unavoidable conflicts of interest, but we can continue to manage them through trust building in other spheres. For example, in economics, India-China bilateral trade, the stakes are high. It is over $75 billion at the last count, and it's increasing. So we would want to attract more Chinese investments in Prime Minister Modi's Make in India initiative for building our manufacturing base. There's a lot that can happen, both ways in terms of economics, and the Chinese are interested in helping our bullet train initiatives. So even though they're investing $46 billion in the CPEC with Pakistan, I would like to humbly submit that India is a safer destination. First of all, we don't have jihadist problem, and secondly, higher rate of return, higher economic growth. So I think that's where the potential lies. If China thinks in terms of larger economic cooperation, peaceful coexistence, we can solve this problem.
Okay, Mr. Ye, your turn. Respond to your colleague from India about India, quote, being pressured by China on different sides. Secondly, is the economic the solution? Is the trust there for the two to increase economic ties?
Yes, I very appreciate that our Indian friend want to welcome the Chinese investment to Indian market to explore the chance. But currently, when the Indian security forces, their troops stay on the Chinese territory, it's really difficult to talk about such kind of cooperation, even for the longer project. In my understanding that India may not have the jihadist problem, but India has the very serious border issue, this different strategy and a different agenda between China and India. So it's really difficult for China to say that India is a safer bet than Pakistan.
Is China trying to push some of its own agenda in India's neighborhood?
I don't think so. Currently we should recognize that India is the country who has all the diplomatic relation with all the neighbors, but China doesn't. China does not have the diplomatic ties with Bhutan, and very clearly it's because of India's operation. So in my understanding that ask to China's hegemony towards the South Asia countries is really difficult to say that, but India, it seems that, has the regional superpower over all the medium size or small size of the South Asia countries. So in this case, really difficult for China to accept the Indian stance over the lot of the regional issue.
Okay, now, Mr. Hali, you heard your Chinese and Indian colleagues, they also have their own issues. But here comes the same question to you from Pakistan's perspective. How can we, out of this quite chaotic crossfire of interests, be able to restrain ourselves from going one step further of going into even bigger danger, military conflict? That's not going to benefit anyone. Mr. Hali, some good solutions?
Yeah, you see, the military solution does not lie in these problem areas like Kashmir or like what's happening close to Bhutan or Doklam or the Siliguri chicken neck, whatever we call it. These are, you see, pinpricks. I remember very well that there was a problem between India and Pakistan in 1999 at Kargil, and at that time the Prime Minister of Pakistan, which happened to be the same one as the current one, Mia Nawaz Sharif, he visited China, and his Chinese counterpart gave him very good advice, and he said that instead of pursuing the solution of Kashmir through the military means, build yourself militarily. And China gave its own example that it has a sovereign claim over Taiwan, but it is not using the military option because instead China is building itself economically, and there may come a day when Taiwan will request that it wants to rejoin the mainland China. So that was a very sound advice. And what China is trying to do through the One Belt, One Road,
Right.
or through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor are that it is trying to build economic ties so that we forget about our internal problems, we forget about our mutual problems at the border, and instead we cooperate with each other.
All
As
right.
far as the One Belt, One Road is concerned, China has invited India to be on board, and including also participate in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. If India gets on board, I'm sure we will be able to resolve our problems and build ourselves economically, and instead think about friendship and mutual coexistence rather than having
All right.
confrontations.